Good morning, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. It is great to be back live, and we are live here again, although we are reeling from the news that's taken place since we last had a chance to speak to each other. Obviously, Brian McClendon, that is official. He's on his way to the Tampa Bay Bucks. It seems like we could be on the verge of seeing Del McGee also become Georgia State head coach there, too. We're sort of operating on the assumption right now that it seems like that is likely happening, although not, as I said a moment ago, not official. So we're going to try to cover all of that ground. Jeff Sintel helps us with that today. Jake Fromm helps us with that today. We'll talk about kind of what's next for Georgia in all of these and the sort of two obvious directions that Georgia could go, especially with the wide receiver job, the job that we know that Georgia's kind of in pursuit of here right now. So we are going to try to cover all of that ground. You'll try to help me catch up here because I'm kind of coming back in the midst of all of this, as you all have been following this for the last few days. So we'll just sort of throw it against the wall. We'll see what sticks. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, you'd like to think that, February might be an okay time to sort of step away from work here for a little bit, take some time with the family, that, you're kind of quiet, a little sort of off-season posture. You'd like to think that was an okay time to sort of sneak away and get away, but as it turns out, that's probably not the case. There's really never a time in which Georgia news stops slowing down. I did love being off. It was great to have a chance to spend some time with my family, but at the same time, you always, are mindful of what may be happening while you're gone. You want to be back talking about it. So very, very thankful here on this Friday to be sitting back down here again and able to address the news that we know as relates to Georgia football and the news we expect to become official here, perhaps in a time, or at least we're on guard for the strong possibility that could be the case. It looks like Georgia is in the midst of at least one coaching search, if not another one coming up very soon there as well. So let's talk about what we do know for now, and we'll kind of work our way through what could be true after that. Obviously, Brian McClendon, as you know, has left Georgia to become wide receivers coach of the Tampa Bay Bucks. And so this brings up the question of, okay, what does Georgia do next at the wide receiver position? This is one of those moments where I think you have to be a little bit honest here, is that there is a lot of energy around the Georgia wide receiver position anyway. And in a roundabout way, we've addressed this a lot on our show the last few weeks, just of like negative recruiting and the perception. Remember, we had this thing on the show not too long ago where Julian Lewis, by the way, there's more news with Julian Lewis out there that we'll get to today here too in a moment. But we had the thing where Lewis took the visit to Georgia back in the early part of the month. And one of his takeaways from the visit was, wow, I didn't know that Georgia was this good offensively. They were even better offensively than I thought they were, something along those lines. What we said at the time was, okay, so that is proof that somehow there is a level of negative recruiting that goes on against Georgia, and that negative recruiting seems to be working. It seems to have an impact where quarterbacks like Lewis, perhaps, certainly the top wide receivers, just have this little bit of a perception about what Georgia is at that position. So the fact that we're talking about the need for Georgia to bring in a new wide receivers coach only kind of reignites the question that people have to begin with of, well, how come wide receiver, at least from a recruiting profile standpoint, how come it kind of lags behind on the offensive side, running back and offensive line, even quarterback, certainly the defensive positions? How come there's this lag and obviously tight end, the position that Georgia sort of dominates? How come there is this this difficulty in establishing wide receiver to be a position alongside the others in terms of the stature and the ability to attract talent? So that's already a little bit of an issue that takes place, already a little bit of a conversation that is ongoing, and that energy is kind of only reignited now that Georgia is looking for a brand new wide receivers coach. The other topic that kind of pops up right away on something like this is also those sort of familiar names. And the notion that Georgia probably is looking to pursue one of two routes here, one of two lanes when it comes to its wide receivers coach. There's the sort of lane of guys who are really, really famous and really, really well known. And I want to talk about that lane and that route here for a moment, because I remember I've worked for this company going back since like summer of 2015. August 2015 is when we started DawgNation Daily. And around that time, I remember I got tasked with going to this event, the College Football Hall of Fame. And one of the very first interviews I ever conducted as the host for DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger was with Hines Ward, who happened to be there. I forget what the event even was, but Ward was there talking to him. And, the subject came up of, hey, this is right when Kirby Smart had been hired. Hey, would you want to go be Georgia wide receivers coach? And at the time, Ward was like, oh, my gosh, yeah, you better believe it. He was very open, very adamant about wanting to do it. At that point in time, Ward was not really a assistant, or not really a coach. He was just a guy that kind of finishing his career, had a kind of an eye on coaching, but is not really a coach. Now, what's happened since then is Ward's gotten a lot more serious about being a coach. He's been on the FAU staff. He worked with the New York Jets. He's in one of those, like, spring leagues now. He has seemingly gotten a lot more serious about wanting to be a coach. But for a long time, Hines Ward has said, if Kirby Smart wants me, I want to be in the staff. And a lot of fans are very well aware of this. And so, therefore, anytime these discussions come up, the name Hines Ward kind of pops up because of how open Ward has been about wanting to have this job. So I think it's kind of important to sort of take this head on because we try to be we always say we're the the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We try to reflect the fan conversation that's taking place. And so since fans are bringing up the name Hines Ward, let's sort of bring that name up too here, because if you want to go back, it's like a year ago, Ward was in Athens. He was doing some sort of promotional event for a hotel or something along those lines. And J.C. Shelton, a guy that I guess does some Georgia stuff online, had a chance to interview Hines Ward. And Ward said again in that interview what he had told me back in like early 2016, which was, yeah, I'd love to be Georgia's wide receiver coach. This is what Hines Ward, the terrific former Pittsburgh Steeler, one of the all-time great Georgia Bulldogs, said with a guy named J.C. Shelton just last year. Take a listen to this.
Speaking about, Kirby, if I'll give you a hypothetical here. He calls you tomorrow to come coach with him. What would your response be?
I'll quit whatever I'm doing. I'm coming here. I would love to come back. I mean, like I said, we took that oath a long time ago. When we committed to the University of Georgia, it was trying to keep the best players in state. At the time, when we all signed back in 1994, we were the best of the best players in high school football. And we all took a vow to change things around, and, certain players, their career took off. Some made it into the NFL, some got injured, some not. So anytime, this is like the dream job for all of us, being friends. That's what it's all about. So it would be a great dream job, but, God has a plan for me, and if that's in the path, then so be it. And I don't want people to go asking everybody and putting stuff, but I would quit whatever I'm doing to come back and be a part of that.
So I played that clip for the simple reason just to articulate how serious Hines Ward seemingly is about his unwavering desire to be wide receivers coach at a place like Georgia. Now, let me say this way. I am not against that on spec. That's not something I would immediately dismiss, as I said before. Georgia clearly has a little bit of a perception issue when it comes to receiver position, whether the results demonstrate that should be true or not. There is a little bit of a perception issue there on that. I think some of the teams that have rolled the dice with coaching hires in recent years have been kind of glad they did that. Sometimes when you make a hire that's a little bit outside the box, in the case of Ward, this would be a little bit outside the box. Sometimes that kind of stuff sort of works. So I'm not necessarily against the Hines Ward hire here. I think it's kind of cool that a guy like Ward has said, I want to be a coach. He's simply done some work to become a coach. And he's been very clear about what his goals are, which is to be a coach at a place like Georgia and how much that would mean to him. I've got no problem with how Ward's going about his business. And if Georgia said, if Kirby Smart said, yeah, this is the guy we want, we're going to take a chance on a guy like this because he is so famous, because he does have cachet, certainly, with a certain, kind of player, perhaps because of the success that he had in the NFL, then, yeah, we're going to roll the dice and bring this guy in. If that's what Georgia wanted to do, I'd have no problem doing that. The only thing I would say to the Georgia fans who sort of wonder, well, why not Hines Ward? He says he wants the job. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Here's the one thing I would tell you to keep in mind. Kirby Smart is a very private person in terms of his thought process. He reveals oftentimes as little as he possibly can. In terms of any kind of like coaching news or anything like that, Georgia just does not really operate with a lot of public stuff related to this. They've oftentimes gone about their business very, very quietly on a lot of things like this. So I have no idea what Kirby Smart's relationship with Hines Ward is. I'm presuming they're close because they did play together. Obviously, Hines Ward referenced that in the clip you just heard. But in terms about how you go about your business operationally, the kind of very loud, specific proclamations that Hines Ward makes in clips like the one you just heard, what he told me way back in 2016, all the times he sort of talked about that in between then, that's just not how Kirby Smart goes about his business. It's just not. So I don't know what that means in terms of, how all this could play out in the future, but it would make me less likely to believe that Ward is a real candidate to be the Georgia wide receivers coach, given the fact that he's talking about this so loudly and so openly, which me personally, I don't mind. I mean, I think there's something in life too, stating your goals and then going after those goals. I think there's something to that. I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that Hines Ward is willing to be honest about what he'd like to see happen. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that's just not how Kirby Smart goes about his business. So the fact that Ward so frequently has spoken so openly about this, Kirby Smart seems to enjoy moving in silence. And, he doesn't want his assistant coaches speaking at all. So the fact that Ward has spoken so much prior to what he would say is his goal to become a Georgia assistant coach, that's just not in keeping with what Kirby Smart, kind of does there. So I would use that as a little bit of a caution of, how realistic is Hines Ward? The fact that Ward is so willing to speak so openly about this would sort of tell me that that's not likely to probably happen. Does that make, whether you agree with it or not, does that make sense? Perhaps it does. Kirby's very quiet. Kirby's very private. Things around Georgia have a tendency to move in silence, and anything that's not silent is not UGA, at least under Kirby Smart. And so that's where I would be with the Hines Ward thing. But that's not the only potential big name that's perhaps out there. A guy that that we are very much in the corner for is our good friend and the respected analyst, a guy that we love having on our show each week, Terrence Edwards. The other day, Jeff Sintel, our recruiting insider, was talking to Travis Smith, a receiver we talk about quite a bit, from Westlake High School, obviously a guy that is trained by Terrence Edwards. And Jeff asked Travis Smith about Hines Ward, who I just mentioned, possibly becoming the Georgia wide receivers coach. And Travis quickly pivoted, well, how about a different famous name to be the wide receivers coach instead? As I said before, a lot of chatter about perhaps famous names that Georgia could hire. If not Hines Ward, what about Terrence Edwards? Travis Smith brought that up the other day. Take a look at this.
Question maybe for the fans. They all talk about Hines Ward should be the wide receivers coach. What would that do for you? Is that a name that you recognize and you'd be like, that's a man that got to the league and you could learn a lot from?
Yeah, but actually, it would be great to see Terrence Edwards as well, being that new step up. Because, what Terrence has put, the stain he has put into the Georgia infrastructure is amazing. All the records he set. Many people know him, but the things that he's done, that'll be great, just to try to follow up through his tracks and, maybe beat those records.
Could that catch Georgia up?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You talked about how do they feel the shoes with BMAC. Would that be a plus for Georgia if they
For
had
sure, due to the fact that I already trained with Coach Terrence Edwards and, the fact that, we already have a great relationship. He's been training me for a couple of years. That would be awesome. But, I'm curious to see.
So listen, I mean, you don't have to guess what our opinion is on this. We love Terrence Edwards. We would absolutely flip backwards to support Terrence getting this job. And I think that Terrence would be really good at the job there as well. Terrence clearly has a heart for players. Terrence clearly knows the position. Guys like Travis Smith getting that personal, coaching from him. Of course, we think that Terrence would be a grand slam home run hire here in this spot. It's also fair to point out Terrence has just taken a job. He's a head coach for the first time in Georgia high school football. I know personally he's very excited about doing that. So obviously, from the standpoint of his current employment situation, I think that Terrence is very happy in the job that he's in. But if it ever became, if the snowballs ever started to sort of spin and roll down the hill for Terrence Edwards getting this job, absolutely we'd be all over the idea that Terrence Edwards could be this job, and we take it very seriously that guys like Travis Smith, who is a big-time receiver prospect out of Westlake High School, the fact that he vouches for Terrence as strongly as he does, and he's not the only one. A lot of really good receivers over the years have. The fact that they speak as kindly of Terrence as they do, that sort of tells you everything that we need to know. Do I think that Terrence will be one day coaching in college? I do. Would I love for that to be at a place like Georgia? Obviously, I would. Is the timing right for that now? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm literally just coming back after having been gone for a few days. As I said before, I know Terrence has just taken a job. I know he's very happy with the job that he just took. We do believe, though, that if Terrence ever got shot at something like this, that he'd be a very strong candidate and a very successful coach in a situation like this. It is certainly nice to hear Travis Smith saying what he's saying. So that's the other sort of famous name that could be out there, a guy that we obviously love and respect, in Terrence Edwards. The other name that kind of comes up here in the sort of famous name category is perhaps a guy like James Coley, who I'll just be very candid. A lot of you know I did not like James Coley as the offensive coordinator here. I thought the 2019 offense that Georgia ran just didn't work. Just did not work. I did not think that was a good offense. But as a wide receivers coach, as someone who's not play calling, as someone who's here for talent acquisition and dipping into South Florida, a place that he knows well, and coaching up receivers, something that I believe that Coley's more than capable of doing, would James Coley be okay in a role like that? I'd have no problem with that. I'm not a fan of James Coley as the offensive coordinator. I've been very clear about that. As wide receivers coach or some sort of position coach, James Coley is clearly qualified for something along those lines. So that's the sort of one category that Georgia could be in here, the sort of famous name, guys you've heard of before. The other part of this is sort of the less famous name. That's the other lane that Georgia could be in, the other route that Georgia could go, names that are perhaps not as famous to everyone in our audience. And the one thing you sort of see there are guys that have deep ties to Georgia high school football. For instance, Jimmy Smith is his name, the former Cedar Grove head coach, that if Georgia is looking to replace Del McGee at running backs coach, that could be a guy that sort of pops up there. More on the McGee situation here in a moment. That's a guy who was a coach at Cedar Grove who knows Georgia high school football. It's not a surprise you're hearing that name sort of show up for some of this kind of stuff. Josh Crawford is the wide receivers coach at Georgia Tech. You can say what you want to about Georgia Tech, but the one thing that Brent Key's been pretty smart about doing is bringing in a lot of former Georgia high school football coaches as a part of his staff. It's support staffers like Bill Stewart and Tim McFarland. It's a guy like Crawford, who's been at Colquitt and Lee County and Valdosta and places like that Georgia, perhaps, instead of going the route of the sort of famous name, the Terrence, the Hines, the James Coley, maybe it's thinking about a guy like a Crawford who is a lot more closely tied to Georgia high school football, even if he's not super famous to everybody in our audience. Either way, to sort of wrap up the sort of landscape of where all this is right now, I think the open position here for UGA creates an opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity for Georgia to establish a little more stability at this position. McClendon's return to UGA turned out not to be a long-term proposition. The results were good. Clearly, you go back to the Peach Bowl in 2022, that may be kind of the shining moment of Brian McClendon as Georgia wide receivers coach, the way those receivers played that day against the Buckeyes. But ultimately, this was sort of a short-term tenure for McClendon here. The guy before that, Cortez Hankton, I think is largely regarded as an unsuccessful assistant coach during his time here at UGA overall. So clearly there's sort of an opportunity for reboot when it comes to a new wide receivers coach and a chance to establish some stability and maybe a chance to sort of enhance the branding around the Georgia wide receiver position. The results have been good. The Georgia offense has been humming right along. There were some big-time performances, I mentioned before, kind of matching play for play the Ohio State guys back in 2022, perhaps the biggest example of that. But that sort of negative perception still lingers here a little bit. And a new wide receivers coach has a chance to change that. And so whether Georgia goes the route of the famous name, the guys we've heard of before, or whether it goes the route of guys that maybe not quite so famous to everybody in our audience, but certainly well known to the Georgia high school coaches, clearly Georgia has a chance here to sort of define what it wants to be at the receiver position. One of the most important offseason topics for Georgia, perhaps taking shape over the course of the next few days. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and we are glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m. across all video platforms. We start 9:45, first and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. Of course, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and then a podcast, however you find them. Apple, Spotify, everything else in between. We're just really, really glad that you're a part of DawgNation Daily. Posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com there as well. A little long off the top today, but a lot to get to when it came to the Brian McClendon stuff here and kind of how Georgia may go in terms of filling that position. We've got a lot more to say about all that here today. Let me also give a shout-out to our friends at Kroger for making the show possible for you today. And don't forget, the Guided Kids Cooking Experience known as Kroger Chef Jr., a couple of times for you to experience that in the month of March, and it's going to be great. I want you to go to KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. That's the word junior spelled out, J-U-N. KrogerChefJr.com, KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. It's just $7 per child. It's a chance to make a fun food item every month. There's a couple different chances for you to enjoy that in the month of March. You go to the website. You can find out more of the specific details, including where it's going to be and when it's going to be a couple of times during the month of March. And in addition to being a part of the food preparation process, you also get some really cool stuff. Usually it's a recipe card in a box. It's the chef's hat, the spatula, all kind of the paraphernalia associated with the cooking process. Our friends at Kroger will give that to you there as well. So find them online, KrogerChefJr.com. Once again, the word junior spelled out, Junior, KrogerChefJr.com for a lot more on that today. So that's the story. Brian McClendon out. Replacing him is the process ongoing here right now. We'll have a couple of guests to help us talk about that here today. It's Jake Fromm a little bit later on about, as a quarterback, what do you want to see from the receiver position here at Georgia moving forward? And Jeff Sintel, a little bit more specifics on the actual candidates that could replace McClendon. We've got that coming up in a moment. But wait, that's not all. Let's get ready to transition now to Around the Doghouse, brought today by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. You certainly appeared to have the possibility that Georgia could have another coaching search that it'll be involved with here coming up the next. I'm hearing a little bit coming through the system here, but you have another coaching search that Georgia could be perhaps in the mix for coming up very soon there as well, because there's been some reporting as of late, and we expect this could perhaps be official as soon as today. I'll show you this from Bruce Feldman on Twitter here, about Del McGee being a strong candidate to replace their departed Georgia State coach, who's now going to South Carolina. What Feldman put out on Twitter the other day is that the one FBS head coaching vacancy left. Some assistants with strong ties are Georgia State for Georgia State are Del McGee, Trooper Taylor, who's now at Texas A&M. You remember him as the towel guy from Auburn, Tennessee, a few years ago, and then Buster Faulkner, obviously the offensive coordinator there at Georgia Tech there as well. The name we care about is Del McGee. The idea that Del McGee could be a strong candidate in the mix for this job here right now. Interesting because McGee is one of those really kind of a sort of OG, if you will, on the Georgia coaching staff for Kirby Smart. He's been with Smart since the beginning, and he has been very instrumental in the success that Georgia's been able to enjoy. I think that when you think about every great football program having a culture, I think that Del McGee deserves a lot of credit for helping cultivate the culture that it's been in place for UGA. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, while you never want to lose a good coach, I think the proper response to McGee, if he does take the Georgia State job, is being very happy for him to sort of move up the ranks and become a head coach. I think he'd be really happy about that, but also just really grateful for the contribution that he made to Georgia while he was here, if it is indeed the case that McGee is on his way to Georgia State to become the next head coach. I think that's probably the right mindset, the right attitude to have about all of this. In fact, I was kind of going back and look at some old stuff here today. Way back in 2021, there was a great clip from Branson Robinson with our Jeff Sintel about Del McGee and the sort of way in which McGee was always so successful, bringing so many great running backs to Georgia, but also kind of creating a great bond within that running back room while all those guys were on campus. McGee has been a very special part of the success formula for UGA. And way back in 2021, back when he was still a recruit, I think Branson Robinson explained all that really well. So in light of the fact that McGee could be leaving, let's kind of think about what Del McGee has brought to Georgia while he's been here. Here's Branson Robinson.
Why is Georgia still your number one?
It's just the relationship with, different coaches, Coach Smart, Coach McGee, pretty much the whole coaching staff. And it's just the bond that I got, especially with Coach McGee, just talk about certain things and stuff like that. Not on and off the field. Sometimes it's just about life and stuff like that. So, it's just really the coaching staff that really pulls me towards Georgia right now.
How would you describe your relationship with Coach McGee?
I would say he's more like another father, I would say. Nobody is your father, but, we talk about things, not things like considering football, some things about, he talk about his wife and kids and talk about how my day went at school and how my grades are and stuff like that. It's just certain stuff like that.
I mean, that's a real thing. And the fact that McGee is able to so easily establish those relationships with players, you can clearly hear in Branson Robinson's words what it meant to him. And that's what Dell's been doing over and over and over again. So McGee leaving would obviously be a big loss, but it's also one of those things that, you don't always get to keep a guy like that around for, we talk about 9 years, whatever it's been, for a guy like that to be here. You just don't oftentimes get the opportunity to do that. But Dell McGee has clearly brought a lot to Georgia. And honestly, what a great success story, both for McGee personally, but also for Georgia here under Kirby Smart, where McGee could be, the third position coach to leave to become a head coach. Obviously, Fran Brown just doing that, going to Syracuse, Sam Pittman before that. There have been other guys, Dan Lanning, leave, but more traditional route, the coordinator spot to head coach. McGee could become the third position coach to become a head coach. And, a guy who, kind of worked his way up the ranks as a high school coach there at Carver in Columbus to perhaps now a head coach in the world of college football. Quite a miraculous climb and a tremendous success story if that's indeed the case here. We'll be watching this closely and looking to see, does Georgia have another coaching search ongoing here? But clearly Dell McGee has brought a lot to Georgia during his time here as one of the very first assistant coaching hires for Kirby Smart way back when he first took the job in 2016, and a guy who's been here for the duration of the Kirby Smart tenure here. So perhaps another piece of big news dropping here before too much longer. Dell McGee perhaps on his way to Georgia State. That is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. When you got the news coming as fast and furious as all of this, perhaps a little bit of Finnish Long Drink makes some sense for you here. This weekend, always a great time to enjoy that, whether it's the peach-flavored version in the Peach State here for a limited time, or you want the long drink traditional, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. You want the long drink cranberry. Everybody loves that. The long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. After a little bit of a time away from work, probably a pretty good idea for me to sort of think about the no carb, no sugar version. Either way, there's a Finnish long drink version for you and a variety for you to try. So go online to thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code, and you can find out where you can pick some up today. This ready-to-drink cocktail. You like mixed drinks? Well, how about a mixed drink? You don't have to mix yourself. That is what the Finnish long drink is. And so you can find out more about all of that online at thelongdrink.com. So before we're done today, former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm going to help us make sense of all of this. But for now, on what we know is coming next for the wide receivers position, what could be coming when it comes to Dell McGee, let's cover all of that ground and more here today with Jeff Sintel on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Jeff Sintel here. And Jeff, you know this feeling. You're away from work, you kind of pop back in. You start playing catch-up as fast as you can. We're obviously doing that today as aggressively as we possibly can. We knew the Brian McClendon news and have known that for a little while. And now for the last little bit, kind of getting acquainted with the possibility that it looks like Dell McGee could be on the move there as well. Let me start with the McGee part of this. I guess, is it your expectation that, what's not official now is simply a matter of dotting I's and crossing T's, and the Dell McGee thing will become official and that Dell McGee will be the next head coach at Georgia State? Is that your expectation here, Jeff?
I guess that's the hope and / expectation because, Brandon, I don't know. We've legitimately thought about Dell has earned his place as whether it's offensive coordinator or whether it's a head coach somewhere. He's earned that, man, over and over. I think when he got through with maybe his second cycle of bringing in DeAndre Swift and then Zamir White and James Cook, I think it was definitely deserving. The thing with Dell is, I'll give you an example. Like right now, Dell is such a big deal that there's a young man in Mississippi that, I'll be honest, I got pretty deep, wide network of connections. And I know Georgia had offered a young man named Kylan Deere. But I had no idea that Georgia was really, really on him. Like the folks in Mississippi, they all think they're getting him. They think he's an Ole Miss lock. But I talked to him at the Under Armour Atlanta camp, and he said that Dell has been sending him messages, been recruiting him like a priority for well over a year. And no other school does that. No other team does that. Brendan, I want you to think about this for a second. While Dell was busy recruiting, flipping a Florida Gator commitment, and then bringing in a young man, the nation's number 2 running back from California in the 2024 class, he was already in full pursuit mode for not a 5-star, but a guy that he really liked in a Kylan Deere. And he even got the treatment. We've talked about this on your show before, where he got the daily Bible verse treatment. Like there was a passage of scripture that Dell would send, and he was in a group chat, a group text with his mother as well. His mother, the recruit in Dell. And I went away from that thinking, number one, he told me that Georgia is really, really in it. And then he said that Georgia's going to get an official. And I said, anybody else going to get an official right now? And he said, no, not right now. And for me, I guess I wanted to tell that story briefly because you take Dell McGee out of that equation, and Georgia probably won't sign in a Kylan Deere now because that year and a half of investment, of recruiting priority, of developing that relationship is so strong. And that was probably going to be what would allow Georgia to pull a talent like that out from the state of Mississippi again. But, that it would be so well earned for Dell. Everybody always says he's going to get the chance to coach his son. If anybody wanted to speak fiscally, that would allow him to still stay in the Georgia, state retirement system because he's been there at Georgia. I believe he said he was 9 years. He was at Carver Columbus before that, and then he would move to another institution in the state of Georgia as well. I'd just say Dell yes about it all. I think the seeing his name in there and seeing his name so prominently in there, he's got the background. He's going to recruit the breaks off the state of Georgia, make Georgia State better. He's going to hire a great staff. So should it be Dell? I'd say Dell yes about that, man.
Well, I like the play on words there. And I think that the way that you're speaking about that is the way that Georgia fans, I think, ought to look at this too, which is, you don't want to lose a valuable assistant coach. And I don't think there's any doubt that Dell McGee has had a lot of value to UGA. No doubt about that whatsoever. We tried to chronicle that ourselves here today. But expectation-wise, a guy hired in 2016, the fact that he could still be here in 2024 in this day and age, I don't know how frequently something like that's going to possibly happen here. So Georgia's probably kept Dell McGee as long as it could have ever hoped to. And for a guy like this, who I think has aspirations to be a head coach, the fact that he could go do that, I think that you ought to be happy about this professional accomplishment and say, yeah, listen, go be great, as the saying goes, and you go have a chance to do that. Your own son is, as you said before, going to be at Georgia State. You have a chance to be a part of that coaching situation, which is, I think, a dream come true for so many people. So, I think if you're a Georgia fan trying to figure out how you're supposed to feel about this, I do believe gratitude and just being thankful for the ride that Dell McGee has allowed Georgia to go on or contributed to as Georgia has gone on, be grateful for that and maybe be in anticipation of what could be next with the thought of, time well spent here at UGA, well done, job well done. And now kind of moving on to the next thing, joining guys like Fran Brown and Sam Pittman, who left the ranks of Georgia position coaches to become head coaches. This, to me, would be the culmination of a phenomenal success story here at UGA.
I think you want to have that, Brandon. It's one of those things where I think two things can be true at the same time. Number one, it would be a big loss for the Georgia staff because Kirby's original staff, it's just Dell McGee and it's Glenn Schumann. That's it. And there'll be another head coach coming off that pipeline and that tree in a matter of maybe 1, 2, 3 or more years with Glenn. But the other thing that can be true at the same time, Brandon, I'd love to get your thought on this. If there's one position where you don't have to have the A++ recruiter or an entrenched recruiter at the University of Georgia and still yield fantastic results, I think that's still the running back position. I mean, the names that are being floated out there, man, Jimmy Smith would kill it in at Georgia. Everybody knows him at Cedar Grove. Everybody knows him across the state. I mean, there's the current 2025 commitment out of Cedar Grove. And I think if you would have asked Bo Walker, he's like, man, you're losing Dell McGee, but you're going to be coached by Jimmy Smith instead. He'd be like, all right, let's go. Let's roll. I mean, that's one of those things where Dell has going to be woven into the fabric of the Kirby dynasty here at Georgia. This 8-9 year run he's had, he's been great. Look at the running back recruiting. I've said before, I think his batting average on the guy he wants is well over 500%. But he's earned it. He's deserved it. And I think Georgia will be just fine with a long list of qualified candidates that would want to coach running backs at Georgia moving forward.
So you mentioned Jimmy Smith, now at Arkansas, formerly Cedar Grove head coach. You also hear about, Crawford, the Tech wide receivers coach, Josh Crawford, as a possible candidate for the Brian McClendon thing. So let me ask you this. Is there something to the ties to Georgia high school football that connects these two things? The fact that Crawford shows up as a McClendon replacement candidate, the fact that Smith is showing up as a Georgia running backs, coach replay. Do you think this is a situation where Georgia's saying, hey, we're looking for guys that have deep ties to Georgia high school football? We want to beef up our connection to Georgia high school football. Is there something intentional about that? Is there a connection about the fact that we're hearing both Crawford and Smith showing up as assistant coaching candidates right now?
I think it's probably a byproduct, Brandon, of it's kind of late in the game and you want to make sure the guy hits the ground running. I'll give you an example, Josh Crawford. Kirby's kind of got a type. It's, we've talked about Terrence in the past. We talked about Hines Ward in the past, but it looks to me like Kirby Smart's hire is going to have the resume. You know what I mean by that? That means he's going to have the high school coaching, but he's going to have the college coaching. He's going to have the position coach somewhere at the college level along the lines. I mean, Dell, people remember Dell came to Georgia high school ranks, and then he was at Georgia Southern, and he was the interim head coach at Georgia Southern as well. So, you need to have some of that street cred of college coaching kind of on your resume. I agree with you. Georgia fans would backflip for Terrence Edwards. I'm going to tell you something about Crawford, though. Crawford has got, and this is rare, Brandon, and this is not kick Georgia Tech in the hind parts day, but I can't remember the last time Georgia was in a top 8 with Georgia Tech for a player they really wanted, and that's Travis Smith. And Georgia Tech's in there. And, yeah, Tech threw the ball around a lot. Buster Faulkner did a great job, but Josh Crawford was a big reason for that. And, one of the things I asked Travis Smith Jr., who I don't mind saying I feel like he's the top wide receiver target for Georgia right now on the board. Maybe there's a couple others that a lot of folks don't know about, but I think it's Travis Smith. And I asked Travis this week, I said, hey, man, what's the feeling like with Josh Crawford? I was like, does Georgia get right back into that thing with Josh if Josh Crawford becomes the next wide receivers coach? And he was almost like, yeah, like he was using descriptive language to describe the way he really likes Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech made his top 8 with schools like Oklahoma and Auburn and Alabama, schools like that, in Georgia, of course. And the big reason for that is Josh Crawford.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think that Crawford's an interesting name. And I also say this about Terrence, too. Terrence is 44, 45, something along those lines. I mean, Terrence is still a very young guy from a coaching standpoint. And to me, Terrence is going about his business in the exact right way. He's been an assistant coach at top programs, most recently Milton. They just won the 7A state championship. He's worked with a lot of, DeBrian Gatling's going to Texas A&M. He's worked with big-time receivers with his high school program. He's obviously coached a million of those with his individual coaching stuff. To me, Terrence is going about his business in the exact right way. And Jeff, now he's a head coach. He could take 10 years, become a college coach, and still coach for another 20 years after that. I mean, from a coaching standpoint, the clock is not ticking on Terrence Edwards. Terrence Edwards could absolutely one day be a big-time coach at a place like Georgia or anywhere else. That's the good thing about coaching. It can be a really long-term proposition. Now, obviously, some guys are younger and they're already in coaching. And, listen, sometimes, good fortune sort of strikes whoever. But the point is if Terrence Edwards doesn't get the Georgia coaching job right now, he's obviously very happy with the job he just took. Who's to say what the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years could look like, which seems like a long time to wait. But at that point in time, you're still talking about being early 50s and a couple of decades, if you want it, of chance to be a college coach. That the coaching profession can still be a long-term proposition if you want it to be.
I think Terrence, to put it simple, Brandon, he's not only a Georgia guy, he's not only a guy that kind of was in the program. So BMAC was a former alum. Terrence was a former alum, but he sets records at Georgia. He's in the record book. Here's the other thing. He is a fantastic teacher. Georgia's top, maybe two or three highest rated targets in the state, CJ Wiley, Travis Smith Jr., who we just mentioned, those guys train with him, man. And so he can coach the breaks off that position. He can coach it fantastically. And I mean, that's a guy you sit there and, does he check all the boxes? Does he have that college resume? No, but you want to talk about a guy that would get Georgia up to speed and make a CJ Wiley smile really big when he hears that news, or a Travis Smith Jr. smile really big when he has that news. And I think the other thing is the way Terrence looks at receivers. I mean, he's a great judge of talent. I'll throw some more flowers his way. And I remember talking to him about Brock Bowers, but when Brock Bowers had just committed to Georgia, And he's like, they don't have anybody like that. Brock Bowers is going to be incredible at the University of Georgia. He was Dog Stradamus at that. He called his shot. And then we all know what Brock Bowers became to be. So he is a great judge of talent. I think the way he evaluates receivers, he really wants them to stress hand-eye. He really wants to stress coordination, the route tree, getting to the top of your routes. But speed is another thing that he says separates a lot of guys. He wants receivers. He wants Georgia to sign receivers. He gets enthused by seeing Georgia sign receivers and play receivers that everybody's scared about, that they're going to take the top off of a defense. And I think a lot of the stars would be in line there with Terrence. And I don't think anybody, Joe, analyst, critic, would have much to say if Georgia brought Terrence Edwards in 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now to coach receivers. I'd love to think it is an eventuality that Terrence will be coaching for his alma mater one day.
Yeah, I believe he absolutely is on the kind of track to get that done. He's doing real coaching, developing himself as a coach. I think he's on that track, and I think it's the kind of thing that you could see play out at some point in time in the future if it's not quite in the cards here for 2024. I just believe that's the kind of track that he's on, and I think he'd be an outstanding hire in the event that was made. Now, let me do two things with you real quick here, Jeff. Two things here real quick for you. On the wide receivers coach, the other name that comes up with a lot of fans is Hines Ward. I know you asked Travis Smith about Ward the other day. What I said before you joined us is, and I want your confirmation on this if you can provide it. Look, Hines Ward is also kind of doing his own path here to become a coach. He's been pretty serious about taking jobs various places. But Kirby Smart's a very quiet, private person. He just moves in silence. The fact that Ward has been so open about this sort of doesn't feel very Kirby Smartish to me. I've met Hines a couple times, seems like a good dude, but the fact that he has talked so openly about this job, and personally, I don't mind somebody saying I've got professional aspirations, this is what I'd like to do. I don't mind him doing that, but the fact that Ward has done this as loudly as he has, that just doesn't feel like a very Kirby Smart thing to me. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I think it's fair. Maybe Hines might be a little bit different because of the DGD status, the NFL status, and we know he'll have no trouble teaching his wide receivers how to stop block.
Oh no!
If he
right.
would be the hire there, and is it the flash hire? I mean, you got to think, Brandon. Hines Ward is also running back at the University of Georgia for some time as well, so he's actually kind of got a CrossFit there with two of these openings right now. Excuse me. Potential opening at the running back spot here. Let me be judicious and fair with all that. But I think, I get what you're saying. Like, you don't get a job at the University of Georgia by publicly campaigning for it. And I don't know if it's publicly campaigning other than just being honest. And maybe that's a way for him to always respect and represent the G and the alma mater. And certainly fans get excited about that. But, Kirby and Hines are very chummy. I remember early Kirby, I think it was like the 2016 North Carolina opener back at the Dome, I believe. And it was like Kirby and him linked up and they were laughing and they looked like two Bulldogs on a Saturday night after a big win against Auburn or something. They were having so much fun, that instant connection, when you get around your college friends and everybody feels like 10, 15 years younger. I mean, Hines Ward, I think, would also be champion. I think he would also be celebrated. I want to come back to one point about Terrence. The Milton resume is strong. He's got a player at South Carolina, but folks forget that he was also at Pace Academy as the wide receiver coach for a lot of years. It's not like Terrence just walked into training wide receivers. He trained guys like Jaden Hazelwood. He can't train guys like Trey Blunt. He's been around a while. He's got those stripes. He's got those pelts on the wall as a coach, and his coaching tree in terms of working with elite high school talent, Brandon. He's worked with guys like Pierce Sperling. He's worked with guys like Oscar Delp. You want to talk about instant street cred, respect, brand name across Georgia football. That's great. The fans would celebrate that. But that also, in that locker room, everybody would know who Terrence Edwards is. And when he speaks, people are going to listen.
I think that's exactly right, Jeff. That's really, really good stuff. Really strong. Appreciate that. And we'll obviously read a lot more from you at DawgNation.com. Next time, we'll get back to the traditional recruiting stuff. I know you had a great story about Julian Lewis, so we'll get back to that here next week. But thanks for helping us get caught up on what might happen with Del McGee, what is happening with Brian McClendon. We appreciate your insight on all that.
Hey, man, glad to have you back. Guys, you can tell when BH's back after a break, he says that good morning. He gets that chest in his voice, and he's ready to roll when it's been a while. He puts a little extra thump into that thing.
I appreciate that, Jeff. We'll look forward to talking to you soon. All right, good stuff with Jeff Sintel there. We're also going to kind of keep it rolling here, there as well. Bring on our next guest here, too, because he's obviously got a lot of insight in kind of how the Georgia program operates and kind of what these assistant coaches mean. And it's always great to get the insight here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take with the former Georgia quarterback here, Jake Fromm, who's in the midst of his offseason, getting ready for what's next in his NFL career, but also kind enough to talk some Georgia football with us here on a regular basis. So, Jake, we appreciate you being a part of the show and getting a chance to speak to you live here today. That's always a lot of fun. Hope you're doing well, and good to have you as part of the program.
Hey, always good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love the hat, by the way, for those watching on video. Georgia till I die. I would say, Jake, that's something a lot of our audience can relate to. We are Georgians until the day we leave this earth here. So that hat's pretty cool. I think it speaks for a lot of our audience for sure.
Yeah, I'm pumped. It's a great Peach State Pride hat that was given to me. And, I'd say it speaks to me a lot, and I like it. I think it looks sweet, and probably be wearing it around a good bit here lately.
I like that for sure. So Georgia's got a wide receivers coach opening, Brian McClendon, going back to the NFL here. I want to ask you a couple things about this. I guess just basic level question to begin with here. You know, as a quarterback, you're obviously throwing to wide receivers, but for the fans who don't have an idea, what is – like how involved is the position coach? We talk about position coaches a lot as it relates to recruiting, but from a day-to-day standpoint, how influential is a position coach like wide receivers coach going to be for those guys on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, they're a position coach. I mean, they're a guy that, whatever position it is, what position group, those are the guys that they lean on, who they're getting coached by, who's helping them out, reaching out to them on a day-to-day basis. And then, position coaches, depending on their role, like different position coaches have different scheming and roles throughout the week. And, one could be third down, one could be red zone, one could be short yardage, one could be goal line. There's so many different things that you could do on a week-to-week basis as far as game planning goes. And you just don't know exactly what those roles are. He could have had a lot on his plate. He could have had very little, but, knowing Coach the way I do, I assume he probably had a lot on his plate and did a lot for the offense from a game planning standpoint week to week.
So how much do you kind of buy into, and I can't remember if you and I talked about this before or not, but, for some people, they're going to want to put the Brian McClendon thing into what looks like an emerging trend of, guys who have long-time ties to college football, and I would say successful college coaches leaving to go to the NFL. The perception here is, I don't think Brian McClendon's spoken about this publicly, but the perception here is, if you've got a chance to go to the NFL, now you want to because college coaching has gotten too difficult because of transfer portal and re-recruiting your own roster and things like that. How seriously do you take that when a guy like McClendon, who's been such a good college coach, when he's leaving to go back to the NFL, that perhaps that's a sign here that there's trouble afoot and there's an exodus of coaches from college football? How seriously do you take something like that?
I think this is huge, and I think it's serious. I think this is like an actual thing that these coaches are thinking about, especially coaches with families, with young families. And it's not that the NFL doesn't require the same amount of time. I mean, in a way it does, but what the offseason looks like, and there's not this full court press on recruiting when you're not doing football, right? You have a little bit of the draft process in here and there, and you do have OTAs in the offseason, but it's not quite the same. So I definitely think this is a trend that's going to continue to be around, and I think it's just something to continue to watch. And especially this offseason and this new coaching hire and carousel, I feel like I saw it more this offseason than I ever have.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as just in the NFL, your roster set. Now, listen, week to week, game day prep, you're working as hard as anybody. You're working as hard as possibly can be worked. But, when it comes to like the draft, the free agency, the training camp and who's actually making the 53-man roster, that when the roster is set, the roster is set. And it seems like there's just a little bit less roster stability in college football right now. Do you think there's anything that can be done about that? Obviously, anytime the NCAA tries to sort of make a new rule, it seems like it gets shot down in court. Do you think there is something that could be done to give a little bit more roster stability to college football? Or do you think it's just sort of okay if, hey, you get paid a lot of money, this is how it's going to be. If you want to stay in college football, we're going to ask you to do a bunch of crazy stuff. I mean, where do you see the future going with all of this?
Yeah, I think probably the next step is going to be signing kids to 2-year contracts. Coming out of high school, hey, you're going to get a 2-year contract, X number of dollars, X number of deals. And they're roped into being there for 2 years, where it used to be, 4, maybe 5. And then as of lately, it's been 1, but I think probably 2-year contracts will be something that shows up just to have a little bit more stability with the roster on a year in and year out basis.
I think that's really interesting. Another story that's out there right now, and this is not official, but it certainly could be maybe at any point in time. Looks like Dell McGee has become a really strong candidate to become the next head coach at Georgia State. That's a guy that's been at Georgia since you were there. He's one of the first, assistant coaches that Kirby Smart hired. And I guess I'm just sort of curious about your reflections on Dell McGee. It seems like the guys who played with him say nothing but great things about him. I've had a few interactions with him. I've always been really impressed with him. He just comes across as a very believable guy. Obviously just the type of guy that you want around a program. What were your interactions like with Coach McGee? And if it is true that he's about to end his time here at UGA, how valuable do you think he's been to the program?
Yeah, I think Coach McGee's track record speaks for itself. He's done a great job. One, as a coach, yes, he knows ball, he knows X's and O's, but he's a fantastic recruiter. Look who all has been in his room since Kirby's been there at Georgia. Had a lot of really, really good football players. And he knows the state of Georgia and everything that goes on with high school football. He's so involved, and he's got a pulse on the state, like kind of no other. And I'm really looking forward to if he does get this opportunity and wants it. I think he'll do some really great things.
Well, I think that's really good. And you mentioned his ties to Georgia high school football. And obviously, this guy was a coach at Carver in Columbus, and you know Georgia high school football as well as anybody. And it seems like, in talking about replacing him or replacing McClendon, this idea of, strong ties to Georgia high school football, that's kind of coming back up again in this discussion. How important do you think that is? It's obviously a valuable thing, but how valuable do you think that is to be someone like McGee who, he has the key to the city in Columbus, basically, and obviously he's been very influential in the Atlanta area, too, with guys who played position other than running back. When you know the state as well as a guy like McGee knows it, and when you think about guys that Georgia could hire that also have similar ties, how valuable do you think that is?
Oh, that's huge, because he's going to get some really good football players there, just because of his recruiting presence, because of his relationships that he knows. And as long as he hires decent with X's and O's, there'll be a very, very successful football program.
I want to ask Jake one more question here in a moment. Let me remind you, though, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily here today. And don't forget, if you want to, speaking of Kroger, take advantage of the great membership opportunity from Kroger. You want more time to enjoy the things you love this time of year on the weekends. You want more money to spend. Putting more money back in your pocket can give you more time to do the things you love. That's what Kroger Boost is all about. It's the membership model from Kroger. If you go to Kroger.com/boost, you can learn more about that. Kroger.com/boost to learn more about that. Get twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying from Kroger, and take advantage of free grocery delivery there as well. All kinds of great incentives to become a member of Kroger Boost. So find out more, Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost. All right, Jake, one last thing for you here for a moment. I know you're kind of an outdoorsman, so I'm not sure how much video games you've ever played in your life, but the EA Sports college football games coming back, I was thinking about you a little bit because you're of the age where if you did like video games, you could have played it quite a bit, but you were also in kind of that weird gap in which there wasn't a game. How disappointed are you that you never saw your face? I guess you could have created a player like the rest of us sort of did, but how disappointed are you that you never saw your face on the EA Sports college football video game? Carson Beck's going to be in it. A lot of these guys are sort of opting into the game right now. Are you disappointed that there was never an official Jake Fromm playing in the EA Sports college football video game?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'm slightly disappointed. I'm not a huge video game person, but I did grow up playing, the college football team growing up. For whatever reason, I always played with Texas and Colt McCoy. I was a big Colt McCoy fan growing up. But yeah, I mean, that would have just been a cool just thing, for a young kid who grew up playing the game and now get to see themselves on the game. So yeah, I'm a little disappointed, but it is fun and neat to see the game coming back around, coming full circle. And I know a lot of these young players are gonna get to experience that and have fun with that.
But you've, I guess, probably but you've been in a video game now. You've been in Madden, I guess. So I guess you've seen your face pixelated on a video game screen, I guess. So
Yeah.
what's that like, by the way?
Yeah, I mean it's fun. To be honest with you, man, I hadn't picked up a video game and especially a football one in a long time. So I hadn't really probably had that experience, but it's really fun to have like my cousins come to my younger cousins come to me and be like, hey, I played with you, and I threw for like 600 yards and 7 touchdowns the other day.
Awesome.
So that's always kind of fun, and kind of just it's enjoyable just to have other people get to enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm not big into video games either. Now, my son's excited about this. I'm sure he and I'll play this together, but I'm not that big into video games. I am big into football cards, though. Do you have any of your football cards?
Yeah. I got a few. Me and my brother Dylan, we had a pretty big infatuation with baseball cards and football cards growing up. So we've been through that and got plenty of binders to show for it.
Do you have any of your own though?
Yeah, I got a few that I've saved from coming out and with the draft and signing all the cards that they made me sign. So I've definitely kept a few over the years.
One of these days, I want to talk to you more about that because that to me is a fascinating process. I'd love to hear more about that in the future. We'll save that for some other time. Jake, thank you so much for being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take today. Great to get your insight on Coach McGee, what might be next for him, and perhaps what could be going down. They have the Georgia wide receivers coach there as well. Really appreciate that. I hope you have a great weekend.
Brandon, thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really good stuff from Jake Fromm there on what it's like Dell McGee on the inside and kind of what a guy like that has meant to Georgia and kind of the wide receivers coaching position there as well. Pretty fascinating stuff coming there on that front. And obviously, Jeff Sentell, a little bit before that, kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of some of those names that Georgia could be looking at in a replacement for Brian McClendon, what could be a replacement for Dell McGee there, too. So with all that said, now it's time to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, we are getting very, very excited. The DawgNation cruise here coming up in just a matter of moments, down to the wire on that. April 22nd, leaving out of Port Canaveral, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, going to have just an unbelievable experience there, bigger than it's ever been before on Allure of the Seas. We actually have an Allure of the Seas related golden shoe coming up here in a little bit. It's your time to join us, though. I believe you still have a little bit of a limited opportunity to squeeze in there, kind of final days there and all that. Jessica Slater, great travel agent. She's the one to check out on that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. And also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Once again, that's jslater@dreamvacations.com. You want more information about the DawgNation cruise, you can check out royaldogs.com too. That's the website to go there to find out about all the things going down. But you can also talk to Jessica about the other great things going on with Royal Caribbean. We just had the debut of Icon of the Seas. You know how fun that has been. We've had a great time with that. But you've also got Utopia of the Seas debuting here in July there too. Also going out of Port Canaveral, doing those 3 and 4 night sailings on an Oasis class ship. Just a wonderful experience. Going to be incredible. So we can't wait to see you on the DawgNation cruise, and can't wait to talk to you about all the great things that Royal Caribbean's got going on here for 2024 there as well. Prior to that, though, let's talk about a couple of the big stories that are out there. Interesting stuff from Ross Dellinger about the fact that we don't even have a 12-team college football playoff officially in place yet. This is the year that's starting, but we're already hearing chatter about further expansion after that, and perhaps a little bit of a power play on the part of the SEC and the Big Ten for just a little bit of a larger slice of the pie on all of this. I want to read this from Ross. This is coming out on Wednesday. He writes, change is coming to the next iteration of the college football playoff. He says, get ready for more automatic qualifiers. In a 9-hour meeting on Wednesday in Dallas, the CFP leaders explored new playoff models that included granting multiple automatic qualifiers to 4 power conferences and a 14-team format. So for 2020-24 and 2025, we're at 12. Ross Dellinger reporting you could already be moving your way to 14. And then the SEC and the Big Ten want more of those teams in the playoff, perhaps as many as 4 teams from each of those conferences. So here we go. I think that's one of the things that some people kind of push back on when the playoff expanded to 12. It was just going to be sort of a short-term thing before you move to 14, before you move to 16. Generally speaking, I'm not really against that. I think a 16-team playoff would probably be fine. I think once you get beyond that, you've probably gotten maybe a little too large to sort of preserve some of what made college football what it is. But it's important to note here, and, in the sort of broad category, I am more of a traditionalist than someone who's embracing a lot of radical change. I think there's, in some cases, a little too much change too quick coming to college football. But the one thing I think it's fair to point out here is that sometimes people want to put this on the players. Players want to transfer, or players are holding out for NIL. That I think that some people kind of put this on the players as those who are sort of strongly pushing the NIL, or I should say strongly pushing college football in the direction of change. I think when you see stuff like this, you sort of realize, well, you can't necessarily just sort of hold the players out and saying, you guys being greedy is what's messing all of this up, when you see the people who run the sport, the commissioners, CFP committee types, the athletic administrator types, they are just as willing to sort of trample on tradition to make more money as some people would have sort of accused the players of being. So in some respects, what you have going on here are the players simply watching what the so-called adults, what the administrators are doing, and saying, well, if you're going to chase down every dollar you can possibly get, then we're going to do the same thing. That's at least the thought process here, which is that right now there's really nobody fighting for, the good of the sport, the traditions that ought to be preserved, that everything. The other day when it was sort of talked about, the SEC and the Big Ten, they're going to come together, they're going to work together. And it was initially sort of spun as they're going to try to solve some of the problems related to the sport. Truth is, everything we've heard since then, and Ross Dellinger's been the guy that's reported most of this, everything we've heard since then is not that, the Big Ten, the SEC are working together to solve problems. No, it's the SEC and the Big Ten working together to preserve every financial opportunity possible and every dollar that's not nailed to the floor. How do we scoop this up? How do we guarantee ourselves all of that? And the truth is, the playoff should be mostly SEC and Big Ten teams. I'm not, from a structural standpoint, necessarily all of that much against that. I'm just simply saying that, right now you essentially see the administrative level of the sport behaving the same way that sometimes the players are accused of behaving, which is, you're trampling tradition in search of the almighty dollar. I mean, aren't the administrators here basically doing the same thing? I'm not against going from 12 teams to 14 teams necessarily. I wouldn't even be against going to 16 teams necessarily. And I'm not against the SEC and the Big Ten having a larger share of all of this. But when all anybody is thinking is, how do we make this bigger so we can make more money, you kind of wonder where the good of the sport and what's proper to sort of maintain college athletics as we've known it. You kind of wonder where that is in all of this, and it's not obvious that it's anywhere, at least here for right now. Here's a strange story I saw where Eli Gold, who has unfortunately battled some health problems, and obviously that's a very serious thing, but Gold is now out as Alabama play-by-play man. And I think this was initially, and he'd been kind of doing only home games. We talked last week about a guy named Chris Stewart. Stewart's been doing the away games and the playoff games, things like that. I think that Eli Gold wanted to maintain that arrangement, but it sounds like that's not what Alabama wants, and so Gold is now no longer going to be doing the games at all. And Eli Gold put out a message saying this is not a retirement. This is not a retirement. Basically, that Alabama wanted him to go in a different direction, which obviously gets a lot of attention because Eli Gold had done those games forever, which is an odd thing. I mean, that's just a really strange thing, and you sort of hate that a situation like this is coming to an end the way that it is. Told y'all before, though, God willing, I live this long. You better get ready for the same thing for me one day, 4 decades from now. I am not giving up any job, certainly not this one, willingly. So I'm doing DawgNation Daily or whatever it is that I'm doing at that point in time. There'll be conversations happening in a boardroom somewhere about, it's by the time we tell BA that it's time to hang it up and go spend time more with, you just go step away from from work. But that I can promise you, that's one of those things I will not be looking to do willingly. So I'll be trying to hold on as long as I can, one day in the future. So from that standpoint, I don't necessarily fault Eli Gold for wanting to hold on to the job as long as he possibly can. One day in the future, I'm sure I'll be the exact same way. In fact, I can guarantee you right now, that's the way that I'll be. I'll be in my 80s, still trying to do this job. I mess up names and stuff like that now. I won't know anybody's name by however many decades in the future we're talking about here, but I'll still be holding on, trying to do the job. So I guess from that standpoint, I sort of understand where Eli Gold is coming from. I'll also mention this here. I know Jeff had a really good story at DawgNation.com about Julian Lewis. We'll kind of talk more about the Juju stuff and things like that with Jeff here in the future. We'll give you an update, though. Lewis has kind of given you the schedule for his next crop of visits here. You've got Bama coming up on March 8th, Georgia again on March 14th, going to Auburn on March 16th, going to Colorado on March 22nd, and then the school that he's actually technically still committed to, USC, he'll be visiting them on March 30th. So the kind of newly reclassified 2025 quarterback Julian Lewis gives you his next round of visits there. So something worth following. He was on campus in Georgia at the beginning of this month. He'll be back again come March. We'll watch that as it relates to Julian Lewis, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, a couple of golden shoes to give you just for a moment. So Georgia on Tap sends this. We don't do any politics around here. We try to stay away from that. But apparently a well-known politician of the day was gifted a pair of golden shoes. And so Georgia on Tap sent this to me. He said, presented without comment, knowing that we don't really talk about politicians here very much. But there you go. Apparently somebody's trying to encroach on our golden shoes a little bit there. So hashtag golden shoe indeed. We'll keep our golden shoe and leave the politics to the politicians. But there you go, Georgia on Tap trying to get me in trouble by stirring the pot there on that. Inlet Dog, though, sends this, and I love this. He says, this may not be the DawgNation cruise, but my family just boarded Allure of the Seas for the very first time. Go Dogs. I love everything about this. First of all, a happy family enjoying a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. There's nothing that speaks to my heart more than that. And the fact that the first thing they did right when they got on board, sending a quick note to me. You have no idea how much that means to me because I love to see folks enjoying their Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. That is an awesome thing to be able to see. So Inlet Dog, hope you enjoy that for sure on board Allure of the Seas. Make sure you tell us how all of that goes down. We will give you a golden shoe there as well, and allows these stinking gators no vacations to enjoy, really nothing of any note to enjoy. Certainly no golden shoes to enjoy, although they've provided plenty of enjoyment for us in the golden shoes throughout the years. It's also been 1,203 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. We'll make that our Gator Hater Updater. Hope you all have a great weekend. It's great to be back. I'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. So hope you're all doing really well today, and it's good to be back with you here live. You want to talk about any of the stuff that's out there, we will do that here just for a few minutes. Always tricky to kind of get back into the swing of things after being gone, especially when you step back into so much news. So we'll see how everybody is doing. DMAR42 mentioning Jimmy Smith, the current Arkansas running backs coach, as a possible replacement for Del McGee. Sounds like that'd be a very good hire. It does. Sounds that be a very good hire. Paul Moon on kind of the sort of the official part of this about being set to be hired. That's sort of the language. Here's the thing you have to understand is that, and I don't know this is what's going on, but I'm saying this is one of those things that could be going on. There are state laws in place about how you can hire people. You know, this is a state university. There are state laws about hires and jobs have to be posted, and so-and-so's got to be interviewed and whatever else. You have to interview so many people. I don't really know what all the laws are as it relates to a lot of this, but there's a lot of that's out there. There's a lot of sort of I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed in a hiring process situation like that. And so even if you know who you're going to hire, you still have to kind of go through the process of hiring it the right way. And, you know, people have to be sort of told at the right time. You know, it's like, you know, there's all kinds of sort of reasons why you want to kind of go about the right way of doing things. This is also kind of akin to the fact that, you know, so-and-so was never offered the whatever job. only one person ever gets truly offered the job. The only person that gets offered the job is the person who gets hired. No one officially gets offered a job unless they know they are going to take it. In this day and age, when you hear about, what was the rumor the other day? Was it Jamie Chadwell was in Starkville, Mississippi, because of the fake tweet that was out there? Coaches don't even visit these places before they take the jobs. They don't come to campus unless they're taking the job. There's a very strict procedure for how coaching hires go down. So if we're hearing all of these reports of set to be the guy, or Georgia State has targeted, all these sort of language terms that make it seem like it's imminent but not currently happening, most of that's related to legal procedure of how you hire somebody, and you want to make sure that there's not some sort of fire to be put out about the wrong person being told in the wrong order or something along those lines. Spencer Clark says they should just hire one of the fans to be the coach because we basically all know everything, which is pretty funny, for sure. Go for 3 and 23 says Sony Michel would be a good hire. I wonder what's next for Sony. He is retired now. I wonder what Sony wants to do next. That's a good question. Paul Moon says, I'd trust whatever decision Georgia makes, but I'd like a splash hire like Ward just because it'd be fun, but I have no idea if he can coach at the college level. Yeah, I'm very much in favor of taking chances. I think it's interesting to roll the dice from time to time. And a little bit of an unorthodox hire in Ward because, he hasn't – coaching is just such a lifer's profession that, if you haven't sort of ground your way up from like the grad assistant level up to the position coaching level and then beyond, you sort of wonder about that. It's one of the reasons why a lot of the less famous players end up being the better coaches, because they are in the position to sort of do the sort of low-level, entry-level work to eventually get their way up to that point. That's kind of the reason for that divide there. When Ward first kind of popped up on the radar, I think a lot of people wondered, well, is he too famous to want to do this? Is he too well paid? A guy had a lot of business interests and things like that. Is he too kind of in the glamorous world of ex-player to want to kind of do the sort of blue-collar work that coaching requires? Well, I would say that the vision of what a coach is a little bit different now because of how, like, another famous former player like Deion Sanders has changed some of that. I think that kind of charts a path for famous ex-player to kind of get into coaching. I do think you have to take very, very seriously the work and understanding that the kind of athletic things that make you a great player, I think, has very little to do with how you become a great coach. It's really more about teaching. It's really more about relationship building. And elite athleticism is not necessarily a contributing cause of what would make you being good at building relationships, what would make you be good at actually being a teacher. A lot of you know this. A lot of you have kids that go through personal coaching in whatever sport they're involved with. And the personal coach you may, a lot of the personal coaching stuff is not people who are going to go play Division I. A lot of this is people who just want to play in high school or just want to be better at the youth sports level. It's like a $59 billion business these days. So a lot of people are getting personal coaching from, all kinds of different personal coaches. And they'll sort of tout their credentials of, well, I played at blah, 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 and I did this and I did that. And that's really cool. But the thing that's sort of hard to measure is, well, how good of a teacher are you? You obviously were a good player, but how good of a teacher are you? I think about that a lot when it comes, because I'm kind of involved in youth coaching, things like that. The ability to be a good teacher is sort of separate from your ability to be a good player. Sometimes it overlaps, but it doesn't always. Jonathan Aaron says, let's just get both Edwards as coaches. I'd love it. I'm telling you right now, I do believe that Terrence Edwards will be a college coach. And I believe he would be a great coach at a place like Georgia. I would love it. I'd absolutely support it. I'd also say if it doesn't happen this go-around, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen sometime in the future. In the case of Robert, I know Terrence sort of touted Robert the other day for the running backs coaching job. Robert's been a very successful high school coach. Gosh knows. He had a very good season at Riverwood, the kind of thing that you don't, no disrespect to Riverwood, but you don't typically hear about them having a great year. And Robert had a really good year there. Now he's back at his alma mater in Washington County. Robert's a really good coach, and he's got a tremendous eye for the running back position. We've had Robert on the show a few times. I like Robert Edwards a lot, too. I love Terrence. Love Robert. I'd love both those guys. Both those guys. Carlos Folsom also shouting out Robert Edwards for the job. I'd be more than happy to do that. Let's see what else. UGA Boy for Life, Brunetti says, I don't think any of the coaches just starting. They have to start somewhere, but not on top at UGA. But this with Hines Ward would be special. I think Kirby once again, Brunetti says. So in credit to Hines Ward, when this first came up as a topic way back in 2016, Ward wasn't a coach of any stripe. He wasn't coaching anywhere at all. Since then, he's worked with a couple of different NFL franchises. I know the New York Jets, I believe another one. He was on the FAU staff briefly, right? And now he's like a spring league coach. So, I mean, the idea that, Ward's got, too much money to want to kind of grind it at a low level and work his way up, he's sort of shown that's not the case. He's sort of shown that he is willing to take those coaching jobs. He's been willing to kind of pay his dues. So, he has taken this seriously in a way that I think at one point in the past, people would have said maybe he wasn't interested in doing. Well, last few years, he has been, for the most part, doing that. But I'll also tell you this. Here's the thing that people just understand. Like, I knew a guy, this wasn't at Georgia. This was another SEC program. I knew a guy who was a coach at an SEC program. And I'll always remember this. This is kind of pre, like Snapchat or however like people are communicating these days. But just to give you an idea of what being a coach is. Sometimes it feels like the actual coaching part is a very, very small part of this job. That this coach told me, as an SEC assistant coach, his boss, his head coach, wanted him to write 100 handwritten notes per day. 100 handwritten notes per day. So that's just one little note of, like, you just got to be wired a certain kind of way. And like a lot of you we have a lot of people who watch and listen to our show who are high school coaches, various type of thing. Even in your level, you'll say the same thing in some respects, that the actual coaching is only a small part of what you're doing. There's all kinds of like hoops you got to jump through. Teachers will tell you this kind of thing too. It's like people get into education because they like being around students. But the actual being around students part of it feels like it gets like a smaller and smaller and smaller chunk of the time. And college coaching has its own version of that you're not paid to be out there on the practice field coaching up and teaching drills. That's the part you like. That's the part you would do for free. Anybody who's ever spent time around a football field would want to be around the football field as much as they could. Coaching up, being on the sideline on game day, that's the part you do for free. The part that they pay you for is the grind part. It's the part of the recruiting process. And that process is not glamorous. It's not. As I said before, it's 100 handwritten notes per day or whatever the new version of that is. It's, being on the phone, texting constantly. I can't stand that. I personally can't stand that. If you paid me $1 million, I guess I'd probably do it. But if you paid me $1 million, like I just spent a few days with my family, and in a situation like that, I want to be really unplugged. I'm trying not to be on the phone and following social media. I was aware of the McClendon thing. I was aware of the McGee thing, but I was trying not to follow it. I certainly wasn't like tweeting about it, and I wasn't doing a bunch of text messages about it. I really want to have those times in which I unplug. But my gosh, we're in a day and age right now where these college coaches, they can't have that. They go on vacation, they're going to text their way through it. They're going to tweet their way through it. There is no putting the phone down. There really isn't. And they get paid a lot of money for the privilege of being able to do that, but that's just not for everybody. It's just not for everybody. Let's see what else. DMart42 says you need to get over Hines. Yeah, I don't know that I don't even know that it's a bad idea. I just think that something about this just doesn't feel. This is my opinion coming strictly from me. Something about this just doesn't feel blessed by Kirby. The fact that over the course of years, Hines has been as I guess open about it as he's been. that's just one of those things that just doesn't feel very blessed by Kirby. It just doesn't really feel like how Kirby goes about his business. Let me go back over to DawgNation.com for a moment. K-Dog on DawgNation.com says, I love how the Dogs' maturation and replacing coaches are going. We're not panicking, rolling over, foaming at the mouth like everyone else is doing. Yeah, I mean, Georgia's been through this. Georgia will go through this. You will lose assistant coaches. If you're a successful program, your assistant coaches contribute to that. They will get jobs, go other places. Now, the one thing that's a little bit interesting is the case of the state coach leaving to go become a position coach. Now, in the case of Georgia, you've got a position coach possibly leaving to go become a head coach. It's a little bit interesting how that's, possibly playing out. I said before, you're seeing a huge talent drain from the group of five. But this just could be what McGee just wants. He wants to coach his son, wants to be a head coach at the college level, and, wants to make the most of this opportunity. I don't know in the future how many more, guys are going to be leaving a place like Georgia to go be a head coach of the group of five. That's not a decision that everyone's going to make right now, just given the talent exodus from the group of five. It's very hard to hold on to players. In fact, that's part of the reason why Sean Elliott left Georgia State's, because it's just hard to hold on to players there. But Dale McGee, just knowing how well he knows Georgia high school football, he may have a better pipeline of talent coming into the program. Perhaps that's the case. I agree with Ken Holcomb, who says if you had a choice between Hines Ward or Terrence Edwards, he says Terrence Edwards would be my choice. Look, Terrence is just closer to the sport. If it's a choice between Hines Ward and Terrence Edwards, my choice is Terrence Edwards. It is. Terrence is coaching and training guys on a regular basis. Jeff called him a teacher earlier. And there is a certain aspect of this position that's going to be about teaching. Plus, I mean, I know Jermaine Burton's not everybody's favorite guy now, but go back and look when Burton first announced his commitment. He announced it on Terrence's birthday as a way of basically showing support for Terrence. Listen to the stuff that Travis Smith said a moment ago. Like, that's forging relationships. Travis Smith and, guys throughout the years. Terrence is very close to Rick Gilbert. And, once again, the Gilbert situation is what it is. But, my gosh, Terrence was very, very influential in kind of his life as being one of the most dominant high school players I think a lot of us have ever seen. Terrence just really good at forming those relationships. So, to me, Terrence is sort of charting a path that could absolutely get him a job like this. Absolutely. But from a coaching standpoint, he's still a young guy. Still a very young guy. DT says, I'm hating on Hines. I'm politicking for Terrence. I'm not hating on Hines. I said before, I think that, taking a roll of the dice on an unorthodox hire, not necessarily a bad decision. I think we see some examples around college athletics of that perhaps sometimes kind of working. But openly discussing it the way that Hines Ward is, that just does not feel like a very Kirby Smart thing to me. And as I mentioned, I'm not keeping this a secret. If it's a choice between one or the other, I think that Terrence Edwards would be a way better fit for Georgia than Hines Ward would be. I do. Now, I also know Terrence a lot better, and I'm a little bit of a homer for Terrence Edwards, so you can take my opinion with a grain of salt, but that is my opinion. Let's see what else. Randy Hall says somebody needs to do a golden shoe of me in my 80s, sitting at Perfect Day, Coco K, doing DawgNation Daily. Yeah, maybe one of these days that's what I'll be doing. Let's see what else. Yeah, SEM Dog says in 2060, I'll still be doing DawgNation Daily from as my new new gig, I should say, as mayor of Coco K. That's very funny. That's very funny. Let's see what else. DT says that he agrees with me that college football leaders are chasing every dollar and don't give a crap about education or traditions that are over 100 years in the making. I don't like it and wonder where the university presidents are. Yeah, I don't know that I trust the university presidents to sort of fix this kind of stuff either. I really don't. And I don't know. Some of this is kind of a complicated topic because, like individually, I'm not necessarily against anything, but like collectively, even if I'm not against the decisions that are being made, when they are being made from like sort of a unclear motivation. Like, why are we doing this? Only because it's going to make us more money? I mean, let's just say it like it is. The college football playoff is controlled by ESPN. ESPN's a failed business. Now, it's a very big business that generates a lot of revenue, but from a profit loss standpoint, ESPN's a failed business. So the fact that college football is going to do whatever ESPN tells it, when ESPN has essentially decided its way into insolvency, like that would be concerning to me. ESPN's willing to give you more money if you'll do what they want you to do, but ESPN's proven for its own business, separate from college football, they're not good at making decisions that guarantee their future. I mean, there has been talk that the NBA would have to buy ESPN just to bail them out. So, that's just a real thing. It's like sometimes you look at the players, they're just holding out for as much NIL money as they can get. They're just transferring on a moment's notice. They're trampling traditions. Well, my gosh, what are the administrators doing right now? And who are they doing at the behest of? ESPN? Very, very lucrative, but nonetheless failed business. DT also says that Kirby hires people we don't know all the time. I mean, a couple of the most recent coaching hires were less than famous people. Fran Brown wasn't super famous. Jadiro Uzo-Duribe was not a guy that I knew very well. But that's kind of also what coaching is. Like, there was a time in which, the athletic director was the ex-coach. It was the famous guy. It's Philip Fulmer, somebody like that. That's a lot more of a bean counter position than it used to be. And I would say the position coaches, they're not bean counters, but the thing that makes a position coach good is not the thing that makes a player famous. Now, you can be a famous player and be good at that. Like I would say that Cadillac Williams was probably a pretty good running backs coach at Auburn, for instance. But look, like, talent is always specific. Competency is always specific. You can be generally incompetent. You can be bad at everything, but no one is good at everything. And that's a really important thing to understand about life. You can be generally incompetent. It's possible to be bad at everything, but it's not possible to be good at everything. Most people have just sort of a specific set of competencies that are different than others, and so, and a lot of us, for like guys, especially around sports, it's like, why is it that I'm doing a job like this? Because I looked around somewhere around my 8th grade year and said, I am not going to play professional sports. Because when I was in my 6th grade or 7th grade, especially 7th grade. 7th grade, I was towering over kids. And I was about a foot taller than a lot. I was basically as tall as I am now in the 7th grade. And you can tell yourself a lot of stories about how good of an athlete you are when you're a foot taller than the people in your age range. But then a year later, that's not true anymore. And you sort of realize, not only am I not taller than anybody else anymore, I am not as skilled or as strong or as fast or as whatever else. When you are no longer a foot taller than the people that you're competing with, things feel very, very different, very, very fast. And so I became very, very well acquainted very quickly with, okay, if I want to spend time around sports, it ain't going to be as a player, because the moment my high school life comes to an end, as sort of a role player coming off the bench, that is it. That is the last uniform I will ever wear. And so mind starts spinning about, well, if I can't be a player, what can I be? And so that's how you sort of end up in a place like this, is because your mind is spinning. If you really, really like sports and you really want to be a part of sports, sometimes it is a blessing to discover very quickly that you're not going to be a player, because therefore you start thinking about what the next thing possibly is. Now, the flip side of that is that for guys who, the great line from the Moneyball movie, we're all eventually tapped on the shoulder and told we can't play the kid's game anymore. When that tap on the shoulder doesn't come until much later in life, until you're like 40 years old, well, you haven't spent as much time thinking about what's next. And that's one of the reasons why I believe you don't see a lot of great former players in any sport become great coaches. Now, sometimes you see that, but oftentimes you don't. And I just think when you've got the kind of athleticism to be a player, that's sort of your whole personality. That's your whole world. It would be for me, and for most of the guys who are that way. As long as you are good enough to play at a high level, that's sort of all you can think about. Maybe that's all you should think about, because what a life that must be. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin and Tennille Calvino and Rick Martin talking about James Coley. As I said before, I don't want Coley anywhere near the offensive game plan. I wouldn't hate him as a wide receivers coach. He's clearly qualified for that job. Clearly qualified for that job. Craig Jones checking back in today. Craig, we're glad you're here. Marshall Fleming says ESPN was doing great. No, they hired a bunch of kids under 30 years old to run the network. Yeah, I guess that's the – I mean, look, obviously ESPN's been impacted by technology. And the cable bundle's sort of fallen apart, and they haven't really responded to that very well. Everybody sort of saw cable kind of coming unglued, and the thought was, well, streaming's what's next. But there's really only one company that's figured out streaming. Netflix is the dominant streamer, and everybody else is playing distant second. I mean, Netflix is dominating the streaming wars right now, and nobody else can figure out how to make a dime. And, Disney Plus has had a lot of problems with its own streaming thing. Let's see what else. Somebody mentioned the ESPN politics thing. I mean, I won't deny, I think at times there's been too much politics on ESPN. I won't deny that. But I also think their failings as a business I think there's a lot more going on than just that. I think that for some of their individual personalities, there were some huge mistakes that were made in terms of forays into politics. But the larger story about ESPN is a lot more complicated than just culture war. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says a great Hall of Fame level players often play merely by instinct and really don't know how to teach others. Bill, I think that's a pretty good point, because here's what I'll tell you. And listen, as I think I've explained, my athletic credentials are pretty limited. But the one thing I do notice is, I try to play golf. I'm so bad at golf. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad. But I try to play. The one thing I notice is that when I'm doing, for me, what would count as doing okay by my own standard, I'm not thinking about anything. When I'm thinking about stuff, swing thought, things like that, a lot of times I get a little too stiff, a little too mechanical, grip it a little too hard, something along those lines. When I'm just sort of free and easy, it just seems to go a little bit better. And I presume the same thing is true for other sports too. The sport I probably spend the most time around now is baseball, because I coach my son's team and kind of evolve with that. And I definitely think that's a sport where if you can get to the point where you're not thinking about anything, now you don't want to be underprepared in terms of your practice and your routine, things like that. But if you can get out there and just sort of do and not think and just sort of react, I think you're a much better player, relaxed, relaxed muscles. I think you just play the game better. I'm guessing all sports to a degree are sort of like that. It's always hard for me to put myself in the position of what do you need to be thinking in football to kind of go out and do what a football play requires of you? I just think that's I'm amazed that anyone can do it sometimes. But I'm assuming there's a certain relaxed mind that has to kind of take over there too. I think that's a really good point that, if you ask Michael Jordan, hey, what were you thinking when you shoved Brian Russell to the court and hit the game winner to beat the Utah Jazz, culminating in your second three-peat? What were you thinking? I mean, he might rightly say, I wasn't thinking anything. I was just being Michael Jordan. And it's as simple as that. And listen, I'm not against Hines Ward, but Ward may be a perfect example of that. I mean, if you watched Hines, what a great player he was at Georgia, what a great player he was in the NFL, what looked to me, a very instinctual player. It's how well does that instinctual stuff translate to the actual teaching part? Because, teaching is not easy. It's not easy to teach anything. It's one of the great skills in life. It's, I think, a misunderstood skill. Teaching is just really, really, I'm talking about actual teaching. It's just really, really hard. And if you're trying to give tennis lessons to your daughter, or hitting lessons to your son, or golf lessons for yourself, try to evaluate the instructor as a teacher. You know, if it's, I played in the U.S. Amateur, yeah, but how good of a teacher are you? Or if it's, hey, I played in the College World Series, but how good of a teacher are you? And honestly, there's no good evaluation stick for that. That's way more than just who Georgia should hire for its wide receivers coach. Let's see what else. By the way, I blame if Georgia on Tap is watching right now, I blame him because we've had more politics in the comment section today than typically speaking, and I believe his golden shoe may have been the reason why. Let's see what else. So go for 3 and 23. Just told Wild Man Slayer, one of our commenters. He says, you've become Jay Shipes, and that's not a good look. I don't know what that's about, but that is funny. Baggins and friends talking about Hines Ward being rated as the dirtiest player. Look, NFL players don't want to get hit like Hines Ward. Listen, Hines Ward, when he played at Georgia, he may have been the best blocker in the whole team. He is a physical dude now. He's a physical dude. If we're going to play like pickup football, sort of like backyard football, any Georgia player from any era, you're just one on the team. Like Hines Ward, I'd draft Hines Ward over almost anybody because you can play him anywhere. I mean, pound for pound, this is as good a football player as the list of football players that Georgia has produced, pound for pound, that are better than Hines Ward. Not long. Not a long list. Not a long list. Hines Ward is one of the great football players of all time. Just an absolute great football player. Oh, so G. Grace changed his name to go for 3 and 23. Man, is that supposed to be funny? Like, okay. Enjoy that pandemic title in 2020. G. Enjoy that pandemic. I still think saying Wild Man was becoming like Jay Shipes is funny. But G changes his name to go for 3 and 23, as if that's supposed to be some sort of mock. If the only thing you can mock Georgia for is that it fell just a little bit short of winning 3 straight national championships, then you've already lost. And G, you know I like you. I like you more than some of these other people do. You know I like you. But if the only thing you can rag on Georgia for is they came just a little bit short of winning 3 straight national championships, then I feel like I've already won. Christy says to call him Gerald. Let's see what else. G. Grace also bringing up Joe Cox. Yeah, so what is Joe Cox doing now? Where's he working? I'm sorry, I should remember this. I know he was at Alabama. Where is he now? Did he take a job? I mean, it seems like he's working his way up the coaching ranks a little bit. Let's see what else. Richard D says, are Coldley and Smith better than recruiting than Terrence Edwards? All I can say is that I think the viewpoint would be they have more experience. Now, are they better? We don't know until we see Terrence get a chance to recruit. But are they they're just more experienced. I mean, the thing that Coley brings with him is he does bring a lot of ties in South Florida. I know it's been a few years since he's been here, but I presume those ties still remain. So he brings a lot of that to the table. Jimmy Smith brings a lot of Atlanta to the table. You want to see Georgia unlock Atlanta? A guy like Jimmy Smith would give you a chance to maybe do that. But do I believe that Terrence Edwards could become the same level of recruiter those guys are? I do. Now, I'll also say this about Jimmy Smith. I mean, how good of a recruit was Rocket Sanders? I don't know that Rocket Sanders was a great recruit, but he became a very good running back at Arkansas. So some of Jimmy Smith's stuff's not just recruiting. Some of that's, some of that is player development too, for sure. Oh, yeah, thank you. Joe Cox is now at Ole Miss, so there you go. But, yeah, I believe that Terrence Edwards could become the level of recruiter that those other guys are, but there's just more experience there. So is the Dale McGee thing official? Is that right? Do we have that as official? I'm still seeing expected. ESPN says sources Georgia State set to hire McGee. So it sounds like we're just right there at the 1 yard line, and all of this is sort of that legalese procedural stuff. Kane Harris says that Hines Ward is a Hall of Fame Super Bowl MVP. I'd take my chances with him. It's not like Hines Ward doesn't know who some of the high school players and programs are. I don't disagree with that. I really don't. I'm not here to tell you that I think that Hines Ward would be a bad hire. I don't have any reason to believe that. And I mean, to be honest with you, like you're seeing like Deion Sanders as the really famous, like Deion Sanders may be the best defensive back of all time, probably is. Deion Sanders may be one of the 5 best NFL players ever. Like, this is a truly great player and incredibly famous and incredibly rich. And he has shown that he wants to be a coach. And so, Deion probably charts a path that other famous ex-players can kind of follow. So I don't think that Hines Ward would necessarily be a bad hire, but this may not be the perfect fit for Kirby right now for the reasons we mentioned a little earlier. Let's see what else. Barry Watkins says, I hope that Kirby Smart already has the plan. We have a lot of changes in offense and a brutal schedule. Yeah, I mean, I think you're okay with this for right now. I mean, you're still, 3 weeks away from spring practice, right? Is it 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that? So, I mean, I don't think you have too much of a hard deadline here at the moment. I think you got a little bit of time to kind of get ready for some of this. Boy, it's late. You got a little bit of a little bit of time to get this ready. I think they want to interview a few people. It doesn't sound like they're going to hire somebody like today. They might, I guess. But, it seems like they want to kind of go through a little bit of due diligence on that. So we'll see. We'll see. Final comments here. Crow King says he suspects it'll be James Coley. He said, I'd love to grab both the Edwards brothers as a package deal. Yeah, it'd be great to see. I'd love it. Nothing would make me happier for sure. Blind Squirrel Sports says, I was hoping that Georgia State would pluck Buster Faulkner away from the flats. Yeah, Faulkner's a good offensive coordinator. And this is the problem when you're a school like Tech. Like, to me, the Georgia Tech model ought to be like what Dave Clawson is at Wake Forest. If you're a small school with limited resources, you need to have the head coach who can be the play caller because you don't have a ton of money for a bunch of assistant coaches. So you bring in a guy like Brent Key. Key loves Georgia Tech. He played there. Key has experience being a part of big programs, but he's always going to be dependent on his offensive coordinator. And he's not going to keep Buster Faulkner very long. I mean, I had heard tell that Faulkner was kind of deep in talks to perhaps become Middle Tennessee State head coach. That Faulkner is going to be a head coach sooner rather than later. So if you're a Georgia fan, you don't want Faulkner hanging around Tech, making their offense competent. I don't believe you're going to have that to worry about too much. And this thought of, well, when Georgia needs another offensive coordinator, if Mike Bobo decides to move on, they'll just go plug Buster Faulkner. He may not be there to do that. Faulkner could be. This is the problem with offensive coordinators these days, is they are fast-tracked to becoming head coaches. You just don't keep them very long. So I would say Tech's time with Buster Faulkner is pretty limited, whether he takes the Georgia State job or not. All right, we got to go. Sorry about that, y'all. One of these days we'll stay till noon, but today is not that day. But I am glad to be back talking to you again, even if it's about sort of weird topics, McClendon and what could be happening with McGee and stuff like that. So thanks for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that, including as we enjoy some warm weather here today, I think, getting your air conditioning tuned up and ready to go for the spring that's on its way. You can find out more information about that. It may only cost you $99. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Enjoy the weekend, everybody.